Everyone's obsessed with cottage gardens right now. And why not? When you look at Instagram, you see all those gorgeous romantic floral pictures. But what people don't know is the original cottage gardens were actually permaculture, hard-working farm beds before permaculture even had a name. Hi, I'm Carol from Almost 2 Acres. Today I'm going to share with you the actual history of cottage gardens. And when you understand how they were made and where they came from, it might change the way you design your own cottage backyard garden.
So let's go back to Elizabethan England around the 1500s and 1600s. Some historians trace cottage gardens even further back than that to the Black Death in the 1340s, when so many laborers died that suddenly there was land available for small cottages with personal gardens. But here's what's important to understand. These weren't hobby gardens. These were working class people with tiny plots of land. We're talking maybe a quarter acre or less, who had to feed their families and maybe have a few flowers to sell at the market for extra income. And they did something brilliant. They didn't separate their vegetables from their flowers from their herbs like we do today. Everything grew together in what we now call a polyculture system, one of the core principles of permaculture. Why? Because they didn't have a choice. They had limited space, no chemical fertilizers, no pesticides, and frankly, no time. They needed gardens that were productive and largely took care of themselves. Think about that for a second. These gardeners were practicing what permaculture founder Bill Mollison would later call working with nature rather than against it. And they were doing it out of necessity centuries before anyone coined the term permaculture. Let me show you how traditional cottage gardens embodied permaculture ethics. You might be surprised. Principle 1. Observe and interact. These cottage gardeners couldn't afford mistakes. They watched what grew well in their specific spot, what self-seeded reliably, what the bees loved. They saved seeds from plants that thrived. Over generations, they built up this incredible knowledge of what worked in their garden in their climate. Principle 2. Catch and store energy. Cottage gardeners were masters at this. They let plants self-seed, free energy captured and stored in seed form. They composted everything, kitchen scraps, animal manure, plant material. Nothing was wasted because they couldn't afford waste. That's capturing and storing nutrients right there in your soil. Principle 3. Obtain a yield. This one's obvious, right? But it wasn't just food. A cottage garden yielded vegetables, fruits, herbs for medicine, flowers for the table or to sell, plants to dye cloth, straw for thatching, even bee colonies for honey. Every square foot had multiple purposes. Principle 4. Use and value diversity. Here's where cottage gardens really won. They typically grew dozens, sometimes hundreds of different plant species. Why? Because biodiversity meant resilience. If one crop failed, others would succeed. If pests attacked the cabbages, they had plenty of other food sources. Plus, all that diversity meant pollinators stuck around, beneficial insects controlled pests naturally, and the soil stayed healthier. This wasn't just good gardening. This was survival strategy through biodiversity. Principle 5. Use edges and value the marginal. Cottage gardeners used every inch. Climbers grew up walls and fences. Herbs were tucked along paths. Spring bulbs were planted under deciduous trees. They stacked functions both vertically and horizontally, using space we'd often leave empty now. Now, fast forward to the 1870s. Something interesting happens. The wealthy classes start to romanticize these cottage gardens. Writers like William Robinson and Gertrude Jekyll, who were part of the arts and crafts movement, they looked at these working class gardens and said, wait, this is actually beautiful and makes ecological sense. Robinson published The Wild Garden in 1870, and Jekyll followed with Color in the Flower Garden. But here's what they understood that's still important for us today. They noted that the informal, nature-based approach of cottage gardens created healthier, more resilient landscapes. The popular formal Victorian estate gardens with their massive monoculture bedding schemes did not thrive as well. Jekyll wrote that these little cottage gardens showed one can get good effects from simple materials. Simple materials. That's permaculture thinking. Use what you have. Work with local plants. Don't fight your site. But there was a shift. The Victorian interpretation started focusing more on the aesthetic, the pretty flowers, the romantic chaos, and less on the function. The food production started to fade into the background.
Before we move on, did you know that cottage gardens actually descended from survival gardens? Please comment below.
So, where does that leave us today? Well, we've got this interesting opportunity. We can take the beauty and romance of the Victorian cottage garden interpretation, but also bring back those original permaculture principles that made the earliest cottage gardens so sustainable. Modern cottage gardens can and should be number one, productive. Yes, plant roses and delphiniums, but also tuck in cherry tomatoes, herb borders, berry bushes, edible flowers like calendula and nasturtiums, just like the originals did. Number two, self-maintaining. Choose plants that self-seed reliably in your zone. Let nature do some of the propagation work. That's free plants and less work for you. Number three, biodiverse. Mix natives with well-behaved non-natives. Plant for year-round bloom to support pollinators. Include plants at different heights with different root structures, different bloom times. Number four, regenerative. Build your soil with compost. Use organic mulches that break down. Choose plants that fix nitrogen or provide beneficial insect habitat. Leave seed heads for birds in winter. The original cottage gardeners may have loved permaculture principles because they were already living them. They just didn't have a fancy name for it. Here's what I want you to take away from this history lesson. A true cottage garden isn't just about achieving a certain look. It's about creating a system that works with your site's natural conditions, produces both beauty and bounty, requires fewer inputs over time, supports biodiversity, and becomes more resilient every year. That's permaculture. That's also what cottage gardens were before they became an Instagram aesthetic. When you're planning your cottage garden, which we're going to do together, I want you to think about both the beauty and the function. Ask yourself these things. What can I plant that will self-seed and naturalize? How can I stack functions, getting food, flowers, and wildlife habitat from the same space? What needs the least intervention to thrive in my specific conditions? If you're excited about creating a cottage garden that's both beautiful and productive, both romantic and regenerative, keep following me for the whole series on cottage permaculture gardening.
Now it's time to start thinking about how you can create your own permaculture bed based on cottage garden principles. Until next time, let's get dreaming.